I've got to tell you about my Aunt Molly. When I was 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, she would crawl in bed with me at night, my little brother, and she would just start telling stories. Some of them true, some of them not so true, some of them all a mixed combobulation of such things involving friends and family and fairy tale and myth. And in all of it, we loved it. And what seemed like 15 minutes of storytelling before bed might have been an hour and a half. And my mom would be pulling her hair out, wondering why we weren't asleep yet. And Molly Lou would still be under the covers telling us stories. And now she has the freedom and flexibility to make that her life's work and her life's calling. And she's probably the best storyteller in the state and very well respected around the country. So y'all please welcome Molly Lou Belle with Tales to Tell.
Brother. It was August the 15th, 1945, and I was 8 years old. And I was out riding my red, white, and blue Hawthorne bicycle in the neighborhood. And we didn't have air conditioning then, so everybody's windows were open, and everybody's radio was on the same station, which Oklahoma City only had one, which was WKY. So all of those stations were synchronized, and you heard, "The war is over." I didn't have a clue what that meant, but I knew it was something really good. And I turned my bicycle around, and I pedaled up just as fast as I could back home. I jumped off my bicycle, left the wheels spinning, and all the neighbors were out turning cartwheels. We were stitch starching. You don't know what that is, you younger ones, but you hold hands and you twirl around. We did cartwheels. Mother came out with a big stainless steel bowl full of popcorn. We didn't eat it. We tossed it in the air, and we did flips, and we did flops. Most wonderful day to that time that I had remembered. Well, some of you may or may not know what the Campfire Girls are or used to be, and the little ones were called Bluebirds, and their costumes were red, white, and blue. Well, we were a Bluebird when you were 8 years old, and then when you got into junior high, you were a Campfire Girl, and then when you got in high school, you were a Rising Girl. Well, the Campfire Girls Council got together, and they said, we think it would really be nice if we had all of the Campfire Girls in their red, white, and blue to meet at the train station on Santa Fe in downtown Oklahoma City and greet the boys when they come home from war. Well, this was wonderful. This was going to be fun. They set up bleachers down by the train station. They had a flag the size of a football field blowing against that beautiful blue August sky, and the band was playing the Star-Spangled Banner when the train came in. But before that, Mother wanted to make sure that I represented America and what it stood for. She starched my little uniform till it would have stood alone. She rolled my hair in Shirley Temple curls till I had a mop of curls on my head that every time I moved my head, they just sprung around. And the misery I'd gone through to get them was bad because she rolled them on rags and tied them in a knot. And I slept on those knots and my head would hurt. But, oh, those curls were worth it. They were so bouncy and pretty, and I thought I was just cat's whiskers. Well, we go down to the station, and the little Bluebirds are standing on the lower rank of the bleachers, and I'm on the end. And then the second several rows are the Campfire Girls, and then the top is the high school girls, Rising Girls. And I'm standing there like a soldier because that's what I'm supposed to do. And I look up, and the train's coming in, and those high school girls are blowing kisses and jumping. And I thought, well, I'm going to do that. So I started jumping around, blowing kisses. My curls are just bobbing all over my face. I was just like a ping pong ball. Well, the train came in. They were playing the Star-Spangled Banner. And I looked up, and there was a soldier coming toward me, and he had a empty trouser leg that was brought over his belt and buckled down, and he has crutches. And he was coming toward me, and he got next to me. He says, well, hello, little lady. What's your name? Molly. Well, Molly, I'm Ben. I'm so glad to see you here today. And those curls, I've just got to bounce one of them. And he put his finger in the curls and pulled it down and bounced it back and then turned to greet his wife, who was coming to to meet him. 55 years later, fast forward, 55 years, I went out to Crossroads to meet a friend for lunch. And they were having some kind of a veteran thing there that day, and veterans were everywhere out walking the mall. And my friend was late, so I sat down on one of those benches in front of Dillard's to wait for her, and I noticed a couple of veterans walking around real slow, and I got to thinking about, wonder what their story is. One of them had a bad limp, and one of them had a horrible scar across the top of his head. So, storyteller that I am, I began to build a story in my mind about them, but I didn't have to wait long because they sat down on the end of the bench, and I could hear them talk. Both of them had lost their wives. Both of them had pictures to show of their wives. And I was really eyeballing it because anything romantic really pulls my chain. So I was watching real close, and they took out pictures, and you know what? It was so precious. Their wives had posed like Betty Grable. If you remember Betty Grable, she did cheesecake poses, and they even put them on some of the planes in World War II, and the men before they got on the plane would pat her little bottom before they got on. Well, they were showing these pictures, and they were all dog-eared and turned yellow and really, really been used. And they got very teary and talked about it. And the one that had the limp, he pulled up his trouser leg and he said, "This is what I got in the war." And he had on prosthesis. And the other guy with the scar said, "Well, I've still got metal in my brain." And they talked about how their wives had stood by them and waited all those times. And then the one with the prosthesis stood up, and he turned and took the other man's hand, and he said, "Well, it sure was nice to meet you. My name is Ben." But he said, "Do you remember when the Campfire Girls came and met us at the station? Yeah, wasn't that nice? And it was so patriotic and so beautiful." And the man named Ben said, "Well, I especially remember a little girl standing on the end. If she wasn't a ping-pong ball, I don't know what was. She's bouncing all over the place and her hair bouncing all over her head." He said, "I just had to bounce one of her curls." And then they parted, and I was stunned. I kept sitting there thinking, could it be? Could it really be 55 years later that's the man's talking about me? And so when I kind of got my thoughts together, I ran to catch him, and, of course, never saw him. I even went down and looked at the register where the veterans had signed in to come that day, and there was no Ben on it. But I've always thought about that, and it's always just made me think. But, you know, those years were, if you look back to then and now, things have greatly changed, and not for the better. And I used to have a column in the Mustang paper, and a few months ago they asked me if I would write one more column. Well, they asked me if I'd come back, and I said no. Okay. Well, so would you write one more? This is really popping, isn't it? Would you write one more and write how schools in Mustang have changed during the 54 years that you lived there? And I said I would do that. And y'all, I got really worried because if I told how it had changed, I would get hate mail like you wouldn't believe. Because I would have to say they're throwing away lunches that Michelle Obama puts on there for the football boys that are the same as the second graders. So they're bringing their food from home. And I'd have to tell all those things the way the schools had changed in 54 years. And I thought, I don't need this in my life. I don't need to hear people say, you know, you're bigoted and all that. So I lay in bed all night thinking, what am I going to write? What am I going to write? So I decided I'm going to write how it changed without mentioning any names and let the reader decide what it used to be and what it is now. I was in Mustang schools for 22 years, and I'm telling you what, when I would go to school every morning, I'd just stand out there, breathe in that baking bread, because those ladies would get there at dawn and bake hamburger buns, hot dog buns, loaves of bread. Well, I didn't have to say anything else. If they read that, they know that now they buy everything frozen. All the dinners are frozen. As a matter of fact, did you know they took the pots and pans out of Mustang schools? Because they don't cook anymore. They buy everything prefabricated. So, but I didn't say that. I just told how it is now, how it used to be, and then they could figure that rest part out. And not only that, do you know that, oh my, I cannot believe this. Our children were going to school 7 hours a day. During that time, there were 3 recesses, a lunchtime, counseling for children of alcoholic parents, counseling for kids that have parents on drugs, counseling for self-esteem, counseling for bullying. Do you know how many hours are left in the day that they could actually study? 1 hour. And then they had all the recesses. And now they're out this week for school. We got Thursday and Friday at Thanksgiving. We used to get Easter, the Friday before Easter. We don't. They have spring break. You don't call it Easter, and you don't call it Christmas. It's holidays. So I didn't say how it is now. I just told everything that was. Do you know, I took it, turned it in, and I said, I know you're going to edit this, because it's very, very long. They printed the entire thing, and it took up half of the sheet of paper. So, and I didn't get any feedback from it, so I guess it was okay. But I think back about the values we had in our family growing up, and I'm telling you, it's so different now than it was then. But we didn't know what we had. We didn't have anything to compare it with except our friends, and they were all the same. I remember I had a girlfriend. She was just a very dear little girl, and she wanted to come home with me all the time, and she didn't want to ever invite me to her house. And one day I said, Libby, how come I never get to come to your house? And she said, hung her head, and she said, my parents are divorced. Well, back then, that was a rarity. I mean, now it's the norm. I mean, it's just a mess. And my sister had polio when she was a little girl, and it made a really mature person of her after she got over it, and she became very, very religious. She already had the background from our parents, but she became especially because she couldn't take part in sports and run and stuff like that, so she spent a lot of time in Bible study. And she had a friend that wanted to move in with us. We had a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house with 5 children, and yet everybody wanted to come to our house all the time. And this little girl, she'd say, do I have to go home? Can I stay here? And my sister invited her to church on weekends, and she'd go to church with us. And that little girl grew up. She ran away from home at 16 to get married because when she would go home, if she saw black sheets on the windows, she knew she had to be very quiet. Her parents were dead drunk. And I was complaining one time to her about having to come in at 11 o'clock from a date. She took me by the shoulders and she said, why don't you appreciate what you've got? Do you know that my parents do not care if I even come home at all? I could stay out all night. Do you know how fortunate you are that somebody cares like that? Well, I never had thought about it. I just thought everybody was treated ugly like that and had to come in at 11 o'clock. It's the biggest thing I ever saw. I thought if you love somebody, let them do anything they want to. That didn't make any sense. But she put that in me. But I did not realize till I was grown that how different we were then as to the way children are now. It's absolutely so much difference. You wouldn't even realize we're still in America. That's how bad it is. So anyway, we grew up that way. Daddy had a favorite scripture, and it was, remember now thy Creator in the days of thy youth, so that before the evil days come nigh and you say, I have no use for them. And he wanted us to learn that, so we would quote it, and he'd say, well, now what does that mean? What does that mean? Remember what? Our Creator, and we got very tired of this because it was always repeat, repeat, repeat. Boy, I sure miss those days. Now, so he'd say, okay, what does that mean? It means to remember God made us. Why? Before we get old, because when we get old, we won't be interested in it. And Dad'd say, you remember that too. And he always used to say, every time when he came home from work, okay, kids, how's your conduct? Well, what in the world did that mean? I thought it had something to do with electricity, but I don't know what. But I knew I was supposed to say, above reproach. And he'd say, you better say that. You better say that. Well, what was bad was when he'd come home from work and all the neighborhood kids were out there playing kick the can, he'd get out of the car and say, okay, kids, every one of you over here, how's your conduct? They'd look at each other like this is some kind of nut. Well, I get in the house and I say, Daddy, please quit saying that. The kids think you're stupid. They don't know what you're talking about. And he said, well, they need to learn. Need to learn. And that's the way it was. So we grew up in that kind of situation. And our mother, probably Patty's my sister, our mother died in 1997. And she was in the hospital at Deaconess. And we gathered around her bed, and some of us were telling Mother, we knew she could hear us. We think she could comprehend, but she couldn't speak. Well, each of us was telling something about our childhood that we remembered. And there were 4 girls, and I have one brother who's a little character. And back when we were little, if we got a Coke or a 7-Up or anything, that was a real treat. And we only got it on special occasions. And when we went to see our grandmother in Texas, our uncle owned the only grocery store in the little town of 600 population. So he'd let us go in there and graze. And boy, we'd take advantage of it. We'd drink those Cokes like nobody did. And I couldn't even stand them. But it's something you're supposed to like and not have. So I'd drink them. Put peanuts in them and drink the peanuts. Well, we got gathered around Mother's bed. And one thing about it, when we were little, if we had an upset stomach, we got to drink a 7-Up. That was a real treat. When we gathered around the bed, my little brother got right in Mother's face. He said, Mother, do you remember what the worst day of my life was when I was a little boy? And you could see her cheeks, kind of, we know she heard. He said, I had an upset stomach, and you sent Molly Lou to the grocery store to get me a 7-Up, and she shook it all the way home. And when she got home and I opened it, I didn't even get a drink of it. And I thought, what a blessing for my mother to pass into eternity knowing that the only bad thing my brother remembered about his childhood was a 7-Up he didn't get to drink. He was a character, and I have to tell you this. When he was 5 years old, he got for Christmas a little rubber dagger that you could put the scabbard on your pocket, and pick it out, and you'd go stab it, and it'd go up in the handle. Mother was washing dishes, and she looked out the window there, and he was dragging an orange crate out of the garage. He's pulling it, and he's 5 years old. He's pulling it on. He climbs up on it. He takes that little knife out of that scabbard. He looks up toward heaven. He says, goodbye, cruel world. I now commit adultery. My mother ran out there and grabbed that little man and got him in there, and they had a little talk about the 10 Commandments. That's just the start. One night I came in from a date. I was 16, and his light was on under the door there. He said, Malu, is that you? I said, well, who'd you think it was? He said, come in here. I got to ask you something. I said, what is it? He said, oh, it's just bad. I don't know if I can even say it or not. I said, well, what is it? I'm 16 years old. I know everything, He's sitting on the side of the bed, perspiration beads across his top of his lip, and his chin was quivering. I just don't think I can say it. Will you look the other way while I ask you? And I said, Bob, ask me the question. I want to go to bed. He covered up his eyes. He looked at the floor, and he said, can you breathe when you kiss a girl, or do you have to hold your breath? I said, I'll let you know when I find out. Anyway, that's just the way he was. Well, when I was 13 years old, 9, 10, yeah, I was 4 years older than him. He was 9 years old and I was 13. Is that right? We went to Cordell Christian Camp in Cordell, Oklahoma. And you know that? Oh, okay. So they had a little arch there that said Cordell Christian Camp. Well, actually, it was YKQB was what it was called, but Cordell Christian Camp was easier to say. But before we went, oh my, we had a neighborhood barber shop, and Daddy and Bob would go to the barber shop together to get the haircuts on Saturday before church on Sunday. And Bob walked in, he says, hey, Mom, don't you think I'm old enough to go get my hair cut by myself? She said, well, yeah, you're 9 years old. I think you can walk down. It's just down the block. You can go down there without your daddy. He'd been gone about 15 minutes, and the phone rang, and the barber said, Mrs. Rogers, I've got Bob in the barber chair, and he's wanting a different haircut today than what he usually gets. Do you mind? And Mother said, well, no. What other way is there beside a burr or a flat top? Or put grease on it and part it, and like an old man, put it over the side of your head. Well, I didn't know if Mother was going to cry or if she was going to laugh when he walked in the door because he'd gotten a mohawk. Now, this was the Saturday before we were to leave for church camp on Sunday. That meant we was going to be going to church with his head looking like a billiard ball. I'm not kidding. The guy had even greased his head. It was horrible looking. And I said, I don't know him. I'm not sitting with the family tomorrow at church. I'm going to sit on the other side of the building. I don't know him. And furthermore, when we get to camp, I'm not going to know him for a week. Well, he just thought he was just the cutest thing there ever was. And he strutted around like a little banty rooster and thought his head was just so cute and that little whisk broom going down there. Well, when I was working at the Mustang High School library, we had a boy come in one day. He was about 6 feet tall and high as a kite, I found out later. He had a dog collar on with spikes on it. He had 36-inch hair, and it was straight up stiff, red, green, purple, and blue. And then he had on boots, and he had on old handcuffs hanging on there, and he walked in there. Well, it shocked me so bad, and don't have a lot of tact. I said, oh, I sat down. It got me so bad. I said, son, you are hard up for attention, aren't you? He walked over to my desk. I thought I was going to get killed because this is a different era. He leaned over and he said, yeah, and it worked, didn't it? So that kind of hairdo now is not something that people say, oh, would you look at that? That guy's, well, I would say that, but mostly that's acceptable behavior. That's the way it was with a mohawk back in the 50s. I mean, nobody did that kind of a stupid thing. That's the dumbest thing in the world. Well, we go to church the next morning, and we have, between classes, here he comes walking into the auditorium. It's like, look at me. Oh, I nearly died. I said, he looks like a nut. He doesn't belong in this family. So I sat down on the other side, and everybody, the song leader got up to lead the singing. He got so tickled he had to sit down on the stage and slap his leg. That's how funny it was. So everybody turned around to see what made him slap his leg. And there's Bob just grinning like a possum coming in there, with a little haircut. I'm sitting over there just seething. Well, right after church, Daddy took us to Cordell to camp. And I said, Daddy, when you get to that arch, I'm going to get down on the floorboard, and you take Bob over there where the boys go, and then circle back around and go where the girls go. I'll pop back up. I said, nobody's going to know who I am. I am not going to be associated with them. So we got there. The first night, now this is in the days when you didn't have electric dishwashers. Everything was washed by hand. The floor was mopped. Everything was done by hand. So we're sitting at the table. Virgil Bentley was the preacher at Mayfair Church of Christ at that time, and he was directing the camp. And he was sitting at the end of my table, and I heard him say, Mohawk did what? And I said, oh, no. Now, when we got on the campus, everybody just immediately called him Mohawk. They didn't even know he had a name, because that was his name. That's all they knew. Well, they had a family-style dinner that night where they passed big platters of hamburgers. Well, Bob decided he wanted more than one, so he got 4 of them and bit off of each one and put it on his plate before they said the prayer, because he wanted to be sure to get 4 hamburgers. And he got KP for that. That meant he washed all 700 dishes, dried all 700 dishes, mopped the floor. He didn't do anything. It was midnight before he got to bed. That was just the start. The whole week was a disaster. I said, the poor guy, it's that haircut. He acts crazy all the time, but not this crazy. Well, the next night, he locked all the preachers in the canteen after Vespers and hid the key. Well, I'm in my bunk in my cabin, and I hear them all saying, Mohawk, Mohawk. He did it, Mohawk, Mohawk. Well, I couldn't let anybody know I was kin to him, but I wanted to know what he was doing. So I'd listen, and well, sure enough, they were in there beating on the door. Somebody go get Mohawk and get the keys. Well, they got him out. Well, he got KP at breakfast the next morning. That's the second day of camp. He'd already had KP twice. This went on all week long. Bill Kofer was one of the young ministers there on the campus, and he was engaged to a girl in Dallas, and he was writing her a letter on the typewriter in the office. And Bob sneaks up behind and plugs in the PA system, leans over his desk, and reads it for the whole camp to hear. Got KP again, over and over and over. And one day they threw him in the lake, and he came out with tadpoles, and he'd drop them in the girls' dresses, and he'd have them all giggling, acting silly. I thought, oh, I don't think I'm gonna live through this week. Well, it just got worse and worse, and that really bothered me because Bob didn't know how to swim, and I was scared. After all, it's my little brother. I don't want him to drown. He may be awful, but I don't want him to drown. Well, by Thursday, I'm just distraught. The whole week has just been a mess because all I've heard is Mohawk this. Do you know that we would meet down under a tree to study the Bible? You know what we studied? We studied Mohawk and what he'd done all week. We didn't even open the Bible. Everybody had a story about him. And it got so bad that I just sat there and tears started rolling down my face. I mean, after all, this is my little brother. I love my little brother. So the big old bell rung for everybody to go up to mess hall. And I hung back behind a tree and just bawled my eyes out. Well, the teacher met me and she came back and she said, "Well, Molly, what's wrong?" "It's Mohawk. He's my brother, and everybody's mean to him." Oh, my goodness, you'd have thought the atomic bomb went off. That whole campus exploded with, "Did you know that Molly Rogers is Mohawk's sister?" "No." "Yes." Oh, it was awful. I was so glad when that week ended. That is not a week that I remember with pleasure. It's funny now, but it was very sad for me then. Well, his hair began to grow back, and he became Bob again, ornery, but not that ornery. Well, he turned 16 years old, and he got his driver's license. He went to work at Stockton's grocery store in Oklahoma City as a sacker, and he saved every penny he made and bought him a little coupe, and it was mint green. Now, he had never had a date, never had a girlfriend. He was just my little brother, Bob. Well, he decides to name his car. That's what boys did back then. And they would have their name painted on the fender of their car. So he went to a commercial artist and in 5-inch letters, old English printing, he had printed on his car, "The Necking Wreck." Well, come Sunday, he drives that little car up on the parking lot, and one of the elders comes out and says, "Bob, do you think it looks good to see something like that on the parking lot of the Lord's church? Do you think that's a good idea?" "Well, I don't know. That looks good." Yeah. He said, "You take it down 3 blocks and park it, and you walk back to church." Well, a good-natured kid. I mean, he just was goofy, but he was precious and still is to me. Anyway, he parks it down there, and he just puts his hands in his pockets, and he's just whistling along, and goes on to church like nothing was said. And that's the way he was. A couple of years ago, I did stories in a library in Frisco, Texas, and Bob doesn't live far from there. And he came, and I was telling these stories about him, and he walks in and sits down at the back. Oh, no, what's he going to do? Well, I went ahead and finished my stories, and to my shock, not really shocked, his hand went up. And I said, "Would you all like to know how that kid turned out?" Well, that's him right back there with his hand up. And so I said, "What did you want to say, Bob?" He said, "I want the last 15 minutes to come up there and tell my side of those stories." We had more fun that day than I think I've had in the 17 years I've been doing this. He's such a character. But that's the way he was. Anyway, I'll tell you this, too, about our family. My mother could make the best potato salad in the whole wide world. I could watch her make it step by step by step, but I could not duplicate it. It was impossible. You know, most potato salad is real bland. You have to put so much salt on it for it to even taste, and then you're just tasting the salt. But hers, wonderful. Well, I had just gotten married. I was 19 years old, and the Lemons were having their family reunion, the first one with me in the family. And I guess they thought I was a little dumb, so they said, "Well, you just bring the potato salad," because that's supposed to be something easy to make. Well, I went to Mother, and I said, "Mother, I want to make a good impression on my new in-laws. Will you make the potato salad for me?" She said, yeah, she would. She made it and put it in a crystal bowl about this big and decorated it with olives and paprika and green peppers. It was beautiful. I went to that reunion, and I'm telling you, they licked that platter clean. "Oh, you're 19 years old. Who taught you how to do this? This is wonderful." Well, this was in the town of Kingston, Oklahoma, which wasn't very large. And word got around that Freddie Lemons' new bride could really make potato salad. And the requests began coming in for the recipe. Oh, well, I had Mother write it out, of course. But the next year, let's have Molly Lou bring the potato salad again. It's so good. Mother did it again. For 10 years, Mother made potato salad for the Lemons reunion. The last time, conscience got the best of me because, they were printing that recipe. It was spreading all over Medill and Kingston. Freddie Lemons' little wife, boy, can she make good potato salad. Well, I just stood up and I said, okay, everybody, I want your attention. Oh, wait, before that. Oh, the 11th year, I made it myself. And it looked just like Mother's. Same bowl, same decoration. But everybody took a bite and said, Molly, what'd you do different? This is not like you usually make. This is different. What'd you do different? And that's when I said, okay, I have a confession to make. This is the first year out of 11 years that I've actually made the potato salad. So I got past that one. But when I married Freddie, he had just broken up with a girl named Patsy. And that's the way I called it, because she became a thorn in my side. I hated that name, mainly because the first time he introduced me to his family, his aunt said, well, I'm sure you're a sweet little girl, but he sure missed a good one when he missed Patsy. Well, that was the first thing. And it just went on like that all the time. Well, one night, we weren't engaged at the time. He was over at the house, and he said, would you like to see my yearbook? I said, yeah. You know, what girl, when she's dating, doesn't want to know all about the man she thinks she might someday marry? She wants to like everything he likes and see everything he sees and know everything about him, because that's what you do. You know, after you marry, it's not important. But it's sure important when you're getting acquainted. So he comes over one day and brings his yearbook. Every single page is Patsy and Freddie. Most popular, most likely to get married. He was quarterback. Crowning the queen. She was the queen. And I was just mad by the time I thought, you just brought that over here for me to see that. I know that's what you did. But I played like it. We went to a reunion one night, and I had so hoped she'd be 5 by 5, 150 pounds. But she was a dainty little petite blonde, long, pretty blonde hair. She walked in. Freddie's best friend got me in the kitchen. He said, I'm sorry, she's not fat and ugly. I said, you know, as sorry as I am. But anyway, I came to despise that name. Well, we married on January the 25th, 1957, and it was a blizzard. It was really cold and icy, and we couldn't go on a honeymoon. We couldn't anyway. We only had $50, and the car broke down, and we had to use it to fix that. So he said, okay, I promise you, I'll take you on a honeymoon to Medill, Oklahoma. He's from there. And he knows everybody. So this big honeymoon was going to be at the Return Motel in Medill, Oklahoma in June. Well, I thought there must be something really special. Oh, he said, we'll go moonlight swimming in Lake Texoma. Oh, that sounds so romantic. Okay, so June comes. We drive into Medill. We come by the Return Motel, which is still there, by the way, which really looks like a dump. And it was a dump then. And we go in, and he said, and a big full moon's coming up, and he says, you want to go swimming in the Ouachita River? I said, is that safe? He said, I know it like the palm of my hand. I know the bottom of it like the palm of my hand. Grew up down there. Even put a diving board down in there. You'll love it. And the water was just like glass when we drove up to the edge of the drop down there. Smooth as glass, and that big moon coming up. Oh, my heart was fluttering. And he walked down there, and he got in front of an oak tree, and he leaned back and held out his arms. I ran into his arms like Melody ran into Ashley's and Gone with the Wind when he came down the road. And he held out his arms. And just as I looked up above me, carved on the tree was Freddie Loves Patsy. Needless to say, we didn't have a honeymoon. I stomped all the way back to the car, and we came home. That was how I hated the name Patsy. Now, I had just begun to get over it because the family began to say, you know, you're just really as nice as Patsy was. We're glad Freddie chose you, blah, blah, blah. Well, on our 38th anniversary, I decided to surprise him and reserve the bridal suite in the Four Seasons Hotel. So we went out to eat. I packed our bags and everything, put it in the back. We went out to eat, and coming back, I said, we're not going home. I directed him there. While he went to park, I went to check us in. Now, when I made the reservations for the honeymoon suite, people think when they hear my voice on the phone, they think I'm about 16. And they'll say, well, honey, this, and sweetheart, that. Well, when I called, I said, I'd like to reserve the honeymoon suite for January 25th. Well, honey, you sure can. What's the name? Molly Lemons. And can I put it on my ARP card? The other end, you hear... She's telling everybody, here's an old lady written. So I thought, that's okay. You just laugh all you want to. You'll be 60 someday yourself. So he comes in, he gets the car, and I know for a fact, because I used to do this when I worked in Duncan for Halliburton. If somebody new came in the office and they looked kind of goofy, you may go back to the other girls and say, come up front and get a drink of water and look what just walked in. You're not going to believe it. Well, that's the reaction I got, because one by one they came out of the woodwork and leaned over the counter and looked at, They all had to check out this old woman that was renting the bridal suite. I didn't say anything. Okay. The next morning was even more interesting, because the new crew had come on, and I'd already told them about me. So when I went to turn in the key and check out, they all began to come out again. And the new manager was on duty, and guess who it was? Patsy. There wasn't any way in the world I could get away from that woman. It was a mess. But before we got engaged, he decided he's going to teach me to shoot a gun. Our dad was an avid quail hunter, and so I was around guns growing up, but I was scared to death of them. And when he would come in from a hunting trip and empty it, I would count on that hardwood floor as they hit, because I was scared he'd leave one in the barrel and get shot. I worried about him constantly. I couldn't stand for him to go hunting. So I was really afraid of guns. So he had me out to dinner for Eddie's folks' house, and after dinner we went walking. Now listen to this. We had just gotten out of church. So I had on, this is 1956, a full circle cotton candy pink skirt with 15 net petticoats under it. And then that's what you did back then. And then you girded up your waist to where you couldn't even breathe. So you looked tiny with all that sticking out. Then I had a cotton candy pink ruffled blouse. My hair was really long, and I had it in a ponytail with a big pink bow. And I had pink ballerina slippers on. I tell you that to tell you this. He says, you want to shoot a gun? I said, you'll have to help me, because I'm really scared of him. He said, I'll teach you how. And as he stepped off the porch, they lived out in the country, he picked the rifle up off the rack there, and we started across the pasture. And he said, well, let's see. Oh, see that big old rock over there? I'll put you up there on that, and I'll put a can over here, and you can shoot that can. I said, okay. So he picked me up and put me up on that rock, boulder, and put a can up there, and he said, now, look through that. I said, that little thingy on the end, is that what I look at? And he said, yeah, and just pull that trigger. This was a 12-gauge shotgun. And I pulled that thing. It swung up, swung me backward, and I rolled down a hill. Every petticoat had stick tights, cuckleburrs, goat heads. I was covered with the stupid things. My hair came down. My hair was full of them. Again, I stomped back to the house. And then he asked me to marry him. Can you believe I said yes? I did. He passed away in April of 16, and we had been married almost 60 years. Would have been 60 years. And so I made it. Believe it or not, I made it. But anyway, that's just a few of the stories that I have made through the years. I think that was all I was going to tell you. I don't want to keep you too long, but there is no end to the memories once you get your mind started. I teach writing classes on how to write your memories from the heart, and that's the one thing. If you pick somebody's memory on one thing, it begins to grow and grow and grow. And my sister, who had polio, she was, when I had the newspaper column. These were the stories it was made up of, and I'd send her the paper. And she'd call me crying and saying, you know, I was so miserable being crippled and not being able to do anything that I didn't see the forest for the trees. And every time you send one of these stories, it tweaks my memory, and I have a wonderful feeling about it. And so she was my biggest fan when my book came out. I wrote a book and put these stories in it. And she was my biggest fan because she said I made her realize what a truly happy childhood she really did have. And that can all be stirred by memories. Now, I know there's some bad ones, unhappy ones, but those only make the happy ones better. And that's my stories, and I'm sticking to them.
Thank you, Malu. So, like she said, she wrote a column for the Mustang paper for years and years, and some of her best stories are in this book right here, which has been a top seller in the state, Kind of Heart by Molly Lemons. We have 8 copies here today. They make great gifts, and we just read them and reread them in our family, and she tells them, and she keeps trotting out new stories that I hadn't heard before. I mean, that's what happens when you are married 60 years and have a rich family heritage, and I didn't say that. I always let the other guy say that. So anyway, there's 8 of these left, but are there more if we run out of these? I mean, they're available, right? We can get them if you want more. Okay, great. How much are these? $15. Very good. So I love it when people in a snooty way wish you a happy holiday because they want to avoid saying Christmas, which of course is a reference to the Mass of Christ, remembering the body of the Son of God who died and was resurrected to prove that he actually was Lord of Lords, King of Kings, and the Son of God. And so they say happy holidays, which means holy days. So you just can't get around it. It's a holy day, and we'll remember that tomorrow. Hey, thank you all for coming out here the day before Thanksgiving. Next week we're going to do some candidate interviews for the northwest part of the state. And Charlie Meadows, why don't you close us in prayer today?
Well, Molly. I lost my last aunt in Cordell, Oklahoma in March of this year, just shy of her 103rd birthday. So I don't have any aunts left. I'd sure like to adopt you if you don't mind. I'd really appreciate it. Promise you I won't even infer Patsy again to you. Patsy to you. So we're going to close now, so please join with me here. Father, we thank you for your goodness, your kindness, and we thank you for Molly coming and sharing these heartwarming stories. Father, tomorrow is a day that we look back to the time that the Pilgrims arrived, and that 2nd November that they were here. Lord, they truly gave thanks to you for the provisions that you had made for them. Many of them had died through the first one, and so the first 2 actually. And so they gave thanks to you for teaching them how to live and your goodness and your blessings upon them. Let us remember that, Lord, all the way forward to today. Let us look to you for the things that we can be thankful for and make this a memorable day tomorrow. Thank you for these stories and all that we saw today before Molly got up to share these stories with us. Lead us and guide us in all that we do, and we ask your blessings on us in Jesus' name. Amen.